to crosstalk the prospects for a Palestinian state, I'm joined by Diana Butu in Toronto. She's a Dubai Initiative Research Fellow, Palestinian human rights lawyer, and a former legal advisor to the Palestinian negotiating team. And in Bet Shemesh, we have Benny Morris. He is a professor at Ben-Gurion University, and his most recent book is One State, Two States, Resolving the Israel-Palestine Conflict. All right, this is Crosstalk, and I very much encourage you, my guests, to jump in. You have different points of view, and I'd like my viewers to see that. But before, let's have a look at what some are calling a diplomatic tsunami.
Despite months of desperate efforts by the U.S. and Israel to head off a move that could become the next tipping point in the Middle East, the Palestinian leadership is heading to the United Nations with the firm commitment to seek recognition as a state.
We are going to the UN with all options open. We're going to the Security Council. We're going to the General Assembly.
Critics are more than certain the General Assembly will vote in favor of Palestinian statehood. But President Obama, who has been struggling to keep Israeli-Palestinian negotiations afloat, has been clear about his opposition to the bid and has warned to veto any such request at the Security Council.
For the Palestinians, efforts to delegitimize Israel will end in failure. Symbolic actions to isolate Israel at the United Nations in September won't create an independent state.
Obama's fears are not unwarranted. The General Assembly vote would leave only the U.S., Israel, and a handful of other countries in a stark minority on the issue, sending a message regarding the legitimacy of the Palestinian position in the conflict. But above all, the vote could cause significant backlash in the Middle East, already in turmoil from the Arab Spring.
The stage is being set for calamity. The high risk of Palestinian riots to fully claim their state, followed by very tough Israeli crackdowns, adding fire to the unexpected and unpredictable popular upheavals in the Middle East.
Although initially the Palestinians' decision to go to the UN became a fallback option after the negotiations hit a dead end last year, the Israeli government has warned that the UN move would halt the peace efforts.
I don't think that it will get them any closer to their desire. On the contrary, the meaning of such a step is that they prefer to go for provocations rather than sitting to the negotiation table.
However, it is also possible that fears of a fallout are overblown and that the vote could even inject momentum into the stalled talks. Predictions abound, but whether the bid or even the notion of Palestinian statehood can tangibly transform things on the ground remains to be seen in the upcoming months. Masha Charnay for Crosstalk, RT.
Okay, Dan, I'd like to go to you first. It's being called a symbolic vote, and even worse, it's a unilateral act on the part of the Palestinians. How do you respond to that after 20 years after Oslo?
Well, it is, in fact, a unilateral act, which is what Israel has been doing for the past 20 years of negotiations. It's been unilaterally creating facts on the ground. And while I'm not somebody who believes that this is going to change anything in any respect, I do believe that it's about time that the United Nations be used as a tool, and that this Palestine or PLO or whoever it is that's making the bid begin to put into place measures to actually isolate Israel for its ongoing violations of human rights and its ongoing violations of the Fourth Geneva Convention and international law.
You know, Benny, I mean, who can blame the Palestinians? I mean, they say they haven't really gotten anything out of what's called the peace process. I mean, this is kind of like the last resort. I mean, so how do you feel about that? I mean, they feel like they've gotten nothing out of the last 20 years since Oslo, and this is the last card they can play.
Well, there's something in that, except that then one forgets history. In the year 2000, the Palestinians were offered a two-state solution, almost all the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, East Jerusalem, by the American President Bill Clinton and Ehud Barak, the Israeli Prime Minister, and they said no. The problem with what they're doing now, not only is it unilateral, but it also involves non-recognition of Israel as a Jewish state. In other words, they're declaring their statehood, but not accepting Israel as their neighbor, and it's not clear whether they even will accept the 67 borders. This is in contrast, incidentally, with 1947, when the UN decided on the partition of Palestine into two states, and Israel at the time accepted a Palestinian state next to a Jewish state. The Palestinians, of course, turned down the two-state offer in 1947, as they did in the year 2000.
Okay, Diana, I mean, this issue of recognizing Israel as a Jewish state, but would that negate the right of return for Palestinians to Palestine?
Absolutely, and this is why Palestinians will never recognize Israel as a Jewish state, nor should we be asked to recognize Israel as a Jewish state. In other words, what Morris and other individuals are saying is, in demanding that we Palestinians recognize Israel as a Jewish state, we're actually demanding that we accept the ethnic cleansing of our homeland, and this is something that no Palestinian leader, including Mahmoud Abbas, as non-confrontational as he is going to accept. But I want to get back to some of the other issues that have also been mentioned, which is that of the negotiations. I was somebody who was actually at the negotiations, and there was no Palestinian state that was offered during any period of the negotiations. There was always an idea that Israel was going to continue to control the Palestinians, control their lives, control their airspace, their territory, their water, etc. And there's never been this idea that Palestinians should be allowed to be free. This is what Palestinians are seeking. Now, whether it's going to come at the hands of the United Nations or in another form, what really needs to be cemented is this idea that Israel has to relinquish control over our lives in order for us to be able to live.
Benny, a lot of people would say by international recognition of a Palestinian state is that it creates a level playing field instead of this hopeless peace process that we have seen, which hasn't brought peace to Israel, hasn't given a state to the Palestinians, and the enormous amount of mistrust that's there. Why can't another state be there, and then you start negotiating borders? I mean, maybe we should just do it the other way around.
Well, we could do that, but I'm all for a Palestinian state, and I'm all for a two-state solution. The problem is the Palestinians, in this action and in their continuing demand for refugee return, in effect is saying we want all of Palestine. First we will take the West Bank and receive international recognition for that and the Gaza Strip, and then from there we will use it as a springboard to conquer the rest of Palestine, and no Israel, no Jewish state. This unfortunately is the fear of most Israelis, myself included, both in terms of what Abbas is doing and what the majority party in Palestine, the Hamas, wants. They say so clearly. Abbas doesn't say so clearly. He's doing it in two stages, but they're ultimately aiming at the same goal, and this is very unfortunate.
Dan, how do you respond to that? Because for 20 years, the Palestinians and the Israelis have been working together. I mean, there hasn't been a peace process, but they've worked together. Do you believe that there's that deep-seated plan where we just first get the West Bank and we get Gaza as recognized as a state, and then the destruction of Israel? Because I don't come across that argument very often, but then again, I don't live in Israel.
No. Look, I think it's really important to put this in perspective. The first perspective is that the Palestinians have repeatedly recognized Israel. They did it in '88. They did it explicitly in 1993. In every single agreement, there has been a recognition of Israel. Every single Palestinian leader has stood up and said that they recognize Israel. Allow me to continue, if you may. If you may allow me to continue, I will answer your question. Now, the problem is that Israel has never recognized Palestine. There is not a single Israeli political party in the Knesset that has recognized Palestine and Palestine's right to exist. Now, going back to the issue of the Jewish state, the issue of a Jewish state is something that was recently added to the negotiations, and during the period that actually negotiations existed, there was no demand for a Jewish state. And the reason that this demand is now cropping up is because Israel wants to extinguish the rights of millions of Palestinian refugees and wants to ensure that it has the right and the legitimacy to continue to carry out very discriminatory measures and racist measures against the Palestinian refugees and against their own citizens who happen not to be Jewish. This is why no Palestinian leader will accept that. But in terms of recognizing the actual state and the existence of a state, every single political leader has come forward and recognized Israel. There has not been, however, a reciprocal recognition of Palestine's right to exist by any Israeli leader.
Hamas has recognized Israel. You say every political leader. Hamas represents more than half of the Palestinian people, and they did not recognize Israel under any conditions and won't do so. They say that.
Benny, in fact, they have. First, the spiritual leader of Hamas, Sheikh Ahmed Yassin, please, if you will allow me to finish, and not cut me off. I've given you that luxury. First, Sheikh Ahmed Yassin, the spiritual leader of Hamas, before he was assassinated, came out in an interview in Haaretz, which is an Israeli newspaper, and said that if Israel withdraws completely to the 1967 borders, then in exchange for that withdrawal, they will recognize Israel. And so too has every other leader of Hamas, including most recently Khalid Mash'al, who equally said that Palestinians want to establish a state on the 67 borders. And this is exactly what we've been talking about, is that instead of Israelis looking for reasons to actually end
what you're
the
saying
conflict,
is not true.
No, it is true. You can actually go to the archives. You are a historian, and you can go to the archives. It is in fact true.
No, I can tell you what Mash'al says. No, he was willing to do a temporary truce with Israel. Yeah, okay. Mash'al has said that he's willing to reach a temporary truce with Israel.
Also
if Israel
indicated that he is willing to accept a Palestinian state.
No. That's true. That's true.
But he says he has indicated that.
All right, I'm going to jump in here. We're going to go to a break, and after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on the Palestine vote. Stay with RT.